Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sentinel. So, the past two episodes, we talked about Colonel Del Pizzo and how he was relieved of command for ejecting out of an F-35 fighter. And, just to draw some parallels, there have been many officers that have ejected out of their aircraft and, made it to become general officers. In fact, the former Commandant of the Marine Corps, Amos, Hog Tamer Amos, ejected out an F-4 back in like 1972. He eventually became the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Whereas Del Pizzo ejects out of an aircraft and is essentially drummed out of the Marine Corps. And to me, that's just plain horseshit. Nonetheless, so I'd done an in-depth interview with an organization called Walk the Talk. And the CEO of that organization is Francisca Graham. She's a former military Army officer, enlisted in the Army, went to West Point, was an intel officer, and then happened to retire and joined this organization. The purpose of this organization is to help people that go crossways with the military. And so we talk about a lot of stuff in this episode, and it's very important for us to understand what the hell's going on when you get investigated in the military or you get relieved for cause, which would be a violation of the UCMJ, or you get relief for loss of trust and confidence, which is an administrative process. There's no recourse. You have no right to appeal. You've got no right to review the evidence against you and whatnot. So I spent a lot of time talking to Francisca about this whole how the military handles such situations as investigations. Do they actually train the investigators to conduct investigations properly? Is there a multi-tiered system of accountability that we've talked about in the past? What's the impact of that on the morale and readiness of the force as a whole? And we also finally talk about how the administrative procedures has no basis in rule of law. It's just at the whim of a commander. This episode is slightly long, but I highly recommend it if you're interested in how the military conducts investigations, how it holds people accountable, and how it does administrative processes, for relieving people for cause. So at the end, please don't forget to leave a comment what you thought of this episode, and what do you think of Walk the Talk Foundation, how they help veterans to deal with many of these issues. And so on that note, let's dig into it with Francisca Graham. Hi, Francisca. Really excited to have you on the Sentinel podcast and, to talk about what's going on in the military and talk about your organization called Walk the Talk. And I'm sure you're going to tell us about that. And to brief, the viewers about what's going on the investigative side of the military. There's a lot going on. And I believe the Secretary of Defense Hexet just came out with a memo realigning some EO processes that we can probably get into. And so this should be really interesting for not only for the retired viewers, but also for the active duty viewers, because it shows them that there's people like yourselves out there to help not only the active duty members, but also the military as a whole. And it's not only service dependent, but the entire Department of Defense. So I'm really excited talking about these issues. And on that note, please tell us about yourself and the background of Walk the Talk organization. And how did you come up with that name? That's the really interesting part. Please, it's all yours.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. So I am, as you said, I'm Francisca Graham. I am retired Army, retired last June, actually, June of 2024. So I'm not quite fully a year out of the Army. I enlisted in 1997. And then went to the West Point Preparatory School, West Point, commissioned in 2004 as a intel officer, and served a variety of different assignments. I spent the majority of my time as at either Fort Bragg or Washington, D.C. as a strategic intelligence officer, basic intel officer, then strategic intelligence officer. And I retired in June of 2024 out of Washington, D.C., not because I wanted to retire in D.C. and I wanted to get some high-paying GS job or really low-paying GS job or or contracting job or any of that other stuff, which is a kind of a typical path for a lot of military or intel people specifically. But I retired from DC because I was in a really terrible work environment. And for the first time in my 26 years of service, I actually made a complaint, or I made a protected communication about this work environment because it was just really, really bad. And it was affecting me. It was all the stuff. And so I made a complaint. I thought that the organization, based on what I believed and I understood about investigations and how they were run and the system of justice within the military, I thought the investigation would be handled, or any investigation would be handled appropriately, that I would not be retaliated against, that I'd be protected as a complainant. The opposite happened. I was retaliated against. I had 2 counter investigations launched against me, both of which, as far as I know, were unsubstantiated. I was removed from my duties, removed from my position, my leadership position. My name was drug in the mud. I was given a career in an eval, so on and so forth. And the complaints that I made, regardless of the evidence, regardless of text messages, emails, whatever it was, those were all unsubstantiated as well. So it was just one of those things where it's just like, well, you know what? I think it's time to retire. I think we're good. I think we're done. And so I found out about this thing called Walk the Talk Foundation in June of 2023. I was very much in the fight. I was being prized against. I went from being, top tier intel officer, always getting the top evals and always being hired for the right positions and going to the schools and all this stuff, to I overheard one of my bosses saying to this colonel out in Hawaii, well, don't worry, we all know Colonel Graham's a piece of shit. She'll be gone in a little while. So there's this just disparity, right? So I was very much in this fight, and someone reaches out to me, a guy named Ryan Swayze reached out to me and said, "Hi, I'm Ryan Swayze. I have Walk the Talk Foundation, and I heard you're going through some issues. Would you like to talk?" And it took a couple times for him to reach out to me because I was pretty scared because you're the whole system's coming at you at this point. And finally talked to him, and it was just wonderful. All of a sudden the light went on of one thing he said. He said, "Your chain of command is failing you. They are betraying you. They have duties and responsibilities to you as a soldier, and they are not fulfilling those duties and responsibilities, and they are instead protecting this other person and hanging you out to dry." And it was just so clear. It was so easy to understand. And so he then helped me go on the offense, which is really, honestly, I credit to that to why I was able to not only retire, but also retire honorable with with still as an 05 instead of getting dropped down to an 04 or some nonsense like that. And so Walk the Talk Foundation, what is it? Why did Ryan reach out to me, and why am I here now? So I currently am serving as the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for Walk the Talk Foundation. I was so traumatized by what happened while I was those last few years in the service, that I made a decision that I wanted to do something to try to fix the world. Like we're all of us type A's, we're all fixers. We want things to be better, right? And we're going to do things to make things better. And so I saw Walk the Talk Foundation as an opportunity to do that. So Ryan started the foundation. He's the one that named it. In January 2022, after he retired from the Air Force. He's a F-16 pilot in the Air Force. He's currently flies for one of our major airlines. And he started it because he was actually a defense attaché, just like you, in Rome, working for DIA. And same sort of thing happened. He made a protected communication. There's a lot of issues going on. Within a week of him making that protected communication, his follow-on assignment was canceled, and he got a terrible eval, and he was sent back to the Air Force. So he saw this happen. He's like, this doesn't make sense. Why is this happening? And so he retired. He started Walk the Talk Foundation. The mission of Walk the Talk Foundation is, we say, it's to give service members a voice when they don't have one. So when you're in these administrative processes being, I make a complaint, there's a admin investigation of some sort against me, or there's an admin investigation of some sort against whoever the subject of the investigation is. the way the administrative system in the military, and when I say that, I mean both Department of Defense and Coast Guard, the way that's set up is there's no procedural law. And what I mean by that is, for all the lawyers in the group, I don't mean to presume that I'm a lawyer, because I'm not. But what I mean by that is there's no rules of evidence. You have no right to see the evidence, and yet you can be administratively separated from the military with an other than honorable discharge. You have no right to know a timeline of when you will no longer be under investigation. You have no right to, you can ask the question and they can say, we'll get back to you. Or maybe they might not even get back to you. You have no right to, it's not an adversarial system. So there's just no rules, right? And so you're in this process, whether you're the subject of an investigation or you're a complainant, and you just don't know what's going on. And again, for a lot of type A people, not knowing what's going on, having no control over your life, and seeing this career that you've built up over 14 years, 15 years, 20 years, 5 years, 3 years, whatever it is, all of a sudden just in this amorphous zone that you have no idea what's going on. And so what we help people do is we say, okay, you're in this administrative system. We're not lawyers. You're in this administrative system. Here are some tools that you have at your disposal to fight back. We will help you file IG complaints. We will help you file EO complaints. We will help you file Article 138. So that's basically saying your commander is not fulfilling their responsibilities and duties to you as their subordinate. We will help you file congressionals. We will help you, if you want to, talk to members of the media. We will help you basically navigate this opaque, unjust system that is the administrative process. And that's all happens way before you get anywhere near a court martial, which is where everyone's brain goes. So that's who we are as an organization. Walk the talk. Ryan came up with the name because he said, I think one of his papers, he equated it to when he was in Italy, there's potholes everywhere on the roads. And, there's always people saying, why doesn't somebody fix the potholes? And Ryan was like, why don't you fix the potholes?
Yeah.
So that's the basic idea of, we care about people. We talk about truth, justice, and the American way and all this stuff, but we're not walking it. So
What
we're trying to
about how long has this organization been around, and how many people has it helped? Just rough order of magnitude.
So we have helped roughly 500
Wow.
people. And our primary focus area is currently serving service members, whether Department of Defense or Coast Guard. We also help former service members who are we're helping a gentleman right now who's in his 80s, and he is having a bunch of issues with the VA using their administrative systems to not give him reimbursements for things that he deserves reimbursements for. So, hey.
This is really interesting because most of the audience on this channel are retired and veterans, and probably seeking help from the VA. So what kind of assistance can you provide them in terms of, aside from the normal applying for and all that? Is it to navigate through different boards and appeal those?
So for this gentleman as an example, so it's the same processes, right? So whether you're in the military or you're out of the military, whether you're talking about Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security or the VA, they all have an IG. They all have different legal processes, different laws that they're accountable to, if Congress will actually enforce the law. So they have all these things, right? So with this gentleman as an example, the VA policy says when you do, I'm not going to give too much information, right? But
Sure.
when you do this thing, you will get reimbursed in this way, in this amount of time. It's not happening. He's been trying to get this stuff happening for almost 2 years, and they keep blowing him off. And he's tired. I mean, he's exhausted. Not only is he in his 80s, but he's also very ill. And so the cynical side says, well, the VA is taking advantage of the fact that this guy's older doesn't know all the processes, doesn't know all the nomenclature, and he's very ill. So whatever, we'll just wait him out. That's the cynical side, right? It's probably more in the between of it's the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is just going to be the bureaucracy. It's going to grind you down like every bureaucracy does. So what we do is we say, okay, give us all your data, and we will craft the narrative. We will find the laws, and we will engage, and we'll help you either if we can file for you, we'll file the IG complaints or whatever it is, or we'll package it so all you have to do is click on the things that you need to click on. Like one of the folks that I was helping, she just got kind of confused with some of the different systems. So I would like make PowerPoint slides, screenshots of the page that I was on. I'm like in circle in red, click here, and then next slide, click here, you know. And like I said, that's for both currently serving and former uniformed
This is
service
really
members. And we
interesting
do.
because just recently I read there's a company under investigation that was evidently helping veterans to navigate through the VA process and charging them a fee. And the fee may be whatever part of the benefits that they were getting. And so it was a big, I wouldn't say a scam, but they were really milking the veterans. And does walk the talk? Is there a charge? Is there a fee? Or is there anything like that that you guys charge?
So we do, but what you're describing is very different. So
Yeah.
what you're describing are um, people who are filing for their disability compensation.
Yes.
And those are your sharks in the water. And what those companies are doing is they're saying it's not just the issue is not just that they're charging veterans to file their disability compensation. That's not illegal.
Right.
What is illegal is these companies will make conditions up
Lie.
and file fraudulent conditions
Yes, I
on
read that.
behalf of the veterans
Yes.
in order to and then on top of that so that's not what gets in the news. What gets in the news is the fact that X company, say if you get I don't know 50%, right? X company gets 50%, or a veteran gets 50%, and they say, well, we're going to charge you $6,000, or they say, well, we'll charge you 3% over 20 years of your VA comp. I don't actually think that's illegal either, because it's kind of like the car dealerships right off post charging a 40% interest, right?
Yeah.
We hate them for it,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's actually illegal if
It's
someone's
not. Yeah.
going to do it, right?
Yeah.
What is illegal is filing fraudulent complaints. So we do not deal at all with the VA comp, disability comp stuff. That is not our jam at all. There are
Okay.
people that do that. We don't have any expertise in that at all.
One of the things when you and I were communicating about doing this podcast, number two was common investigating missteps across the three services. Talk to us about that.
One of the many things that we've identified as part of our trends is that from both the investigation side and the complainant side, there are things that go wrong. So this first portion, we'll talk about the investigation side. So two tiers of investigators. You have your actual inspectors general who've gone to some sort of school. Schools are not standardized as far as the training, duration, or quality. That's something we'll talk about later. And then you have your command appointed investigating officers who are doing your commander's inquiries or your 15-6 investigations or your admin investigations, your unit level investigations, who receive zero training. They don't go to a school. They don't have to take online training, whatever it is. And when I say zero training, I'm not talking about zero training as far as what is, say, sexual harassment or what is property theft. I'm talking zero training as far as how to actually conduct an investigation, how to gather evidence, how to interview people, how to sort whatever, right? So from the investigation side, for both your people who are your actual inspectors general and your people who are your command appointed investigating officers, the overarching thing that we've noticed is something that Ryan and I say: the input does not match the output. You have investigating officers or IOs or IGs who, again, non-standardized training, not much quality control over the training, no measures of effectiveness, nothing that says training is good, matches accountability rate. And yet you have people who can, again, based on these investigations, be administratively removed from the service with up to and other than honorable discharge, which means you no longer have an automatic right to be buried in military cemetery when you die. You lose a lot of VA benefits, GI Bill, etc., right? Or 9/11 bill. So the input does not match the output. As far as the untrained investigators themselves, there is not a single investigation, whether in our own personal experience, Ryan or myself, or any of the people that we've helped, where the investigator, whether an IG or an IO, command appointed investigating officer, has gathered the evidence that they should gather, has analyzed the evidence that they should analyze, has spoken to the people that they should speak to. As an example, in my own personal, when I made a complaint, or excuse me, when the complaint investigation was launched against me, I did my interview with the IO, command appointed, 06. I said, hey, sir, here's all the evidence that proves that I did not do this thing of which I'm accused. When I received the initial referral of investigation where he said Colonel Graham is terrible and Colonel Graham is, Colonel Graham should blah, 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 all this stuff, right? That I rebutted. I looked at the investigation that he had gathered. He did not look at, review, or incorporate into his initial report of investigation, referral of investigation, anything that I had provided him. He did not interview my first line supervisor. He did not interview any of the people that I said, hey, sir, these people were here at this time and can tell you I did not do this thing of which I'm accused. He did not interview them. So on the one hand, the cynical side says, well, he did not do those things because there was already a predetermined outcome of the investigation. Colonel Graham was guilty.
Sure.
Because we want to get rid of Colonel Graham. The other hand, if I wanted to be non-cynical, I could say, well, this person, because they have zero training of how to conduct an investigation, what it means, and potentially maybe what the real impact is, just didn't think it was relevant. And so just decided not to do it. So how do you actually determine as an IO or an IG, if you've not received good training or any training, how do you determine what evidence is relevant? And then after you get that evidence, whatever evidence it is, and we're just talking about evidence at this point, after you get that, how do you analyze that evidence and try to put together a narrative while removing some of your biases? Because that's a key part of investigatory training, is trying to everyone has biases, but trying to tamp down some of those biases so they're not negatively impacting this thing that, other than honorable discharge, could be an outcome, or even court-martial could be an outcome, right? So you have untrained investigators, you have biases that you have to think about yourself, but you'd have received no training or little or a non-uniform training for how to remove these. The other issue is, or another issue is, the interview process itself. And there's a bunch of issues. I'm just going to hit on 3 of them: the untrained, bias, or 4 actually, and the gathering of evidence. The other aspect of it is interviews. You do not know, most people, I would hazard to guess 80+% of all administrative investigations in the Department of Defense Coast Guard are by command appointed investigating officers. That's where the majority of the stuff is. You do not know how to actually conduct an interview. So when I was a major, I was one of the people sent down to, at the time, Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos in Texas, to be a part of an investigation into sexual harassment, sexual assault issues down at that base. I am interviewing sexual harassment victims and potentially sexual assault victims. I am doing the best job I can to be kind, thorough, empathetic, all of these things. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. I don't know investigative techniques. I don't know interview techniques. I don't know how to potentially, hopefully not re-traumatize this person. I don't necessarily know all the body language cues. I just don't know these things because I'm over here. I'm doing
Right.
intel stuff over here. I'm not doing investigation. It's a totally different field. So the interview process itself is, for many people, traumatizing, re-traumatizing, especially when you get new investigators put on cases that drag on for years. And it's a lot of times, one could say, potentially ineffective. So those are four major investigative missteps, in addition to the conflicts of interest of having either the IG or the command appointed investigating officer. Their boss is the commander who commissioned this investigation in the first place and whose person is inside their unit. So, and we talk about, like, what do people get incentivized for? Do people get incentivized because they successfully investigated and adjudicated commanders? Commanders get incentivized because they successfully investigated and adjudicated 15 allegations of sexual harassment in their unit? Hell no. They get incentivized for having 0 cases of sexual harassment in their unit, as an example.
In your investigation, who was the investigating officer appointed by the command and reported to the
Correct.
commander?
100%.
I mean, how is that an independent, impartial investigation?
It's not.
And there's
The
nothing you can do
commander-
about it, right? I mean, there's nothing you can do about it because it's administrative in nature, right? Because there's no review process. The reviewer is the
Correct.
commander.
Correct. The commander is the one that determines to take the investigation,
Right.
sets the scope of the investigation, appoints the investigator, determines whether or not the investigation is sound. There's this legal sufficiency thing with JAGs, but it's not that they don't know what they're doing. They're just, that's not, it's entirely inadequate, just put it that way. And then the commander is the one that punishes.
I mean, how does that even fall under the UCMJ and protecting the rights of the accused?
Or the complainant.
Yeah.
Both.
I mean, oh yeah, either way, yeah.
It doesn't. It
Well, I
truly
mean,
does not.
one of the reasons the UCMJ came about in 1951 was, it was made uniform because each service was running their own judicial process. And what they found out was that the services were not treating the enlisted troops in a judicious manner. In some cases, they're very harsh, specifically the Navy. So Congress decided, hey, we're going to have a uniform code of military justice that applies to everybody, and it protects the rights of the accused. But then all of a sudden, we've got this another system going on the administrative side that circumvents the UCMJ. And the outcome is the same. I mean, you get a BCD out of the administrative side as you could out of the UCMJ.
Correct.
And the other issue is, I mean, if I remember back to the time when I was a junior officer, captain, we would get to do summary court martials. And you get this appointment letter, and we had a duty, and the Marine would come in and he'd plead guilty because he's been briefed. You don't want to piss off the command, blah blah blah, and I wouldn't accept his guilty plea, until I looked at the evidence. But here's the deal: the commander wouldn't talk to you, but the XO would whisper in your ear. That was fairly common. What kind of punishment they wanted recommended and all that stuff. So I mean, the whole system was flawed. And it's a bankrupt system, in my opinion. It's not judicious whatsoever for the complainant or the accused. And I know we discussed this offline with the current administration dismissing all the JAGs. And I hope and later on in this podcast, I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well. Where do you think the JAG belongs, and this whole process of the UCMJ vis-a-vis the administrative side? Do they need to be integrated into one where everybody's protected and everything is transparent? In my case, when I was investigated, it was a kangaroo court, and I wanted no part of it. So I didn't, when the investigating officer came to me, he was junior to me, I told him, go away. I said, I don't want to talk to you. Get out of my office. I threw him out. So he went back and said, I'm not.
Junior to you?
Yeah. I mean, this type of horseshit happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And he was an aviation guy, a pilot
Hmm.
investigating in an infantry battalion. He has no clue what our culture is all about. He's
Hmm.
clueless, but people have whispered in his ear that this is the way they want this investigation to go, and that was the outcome. And my view was, as you rightly said, you've got this tsunami coming at you because you're taking on the entire service. They'll appoint one lawyer to you. When I went to see my lawyer, he had a stack of files on his desk, about 12
Yep.
thick. And I'm thinking, I'm one of those files, and this guy's going to give me literally 30 minutes of his attention. And,
If that.
and the investigation is this thick. He ain't going to read it. You know that damn well. So I had to sit there and do a summary for him, the pertinent points and all that stuff. So you're at a massive disadvantage when you become targeted. And the sad part is, then if you become a roadkill, the system turns against you and your peers turn against you. We talk about the Marine Corps, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. But, I'll tell you, they'll say that, hey, sorry to hear about this, that it happened to you. And, get out of the way so I can move forward, right? That's the mindset.
Hmm.
It's a mediator's mindset, and I have no issue with that. That's fine, But it's really tragic. The sad part is not the individual. The sad part is what happens to the families. How many families we've destroyed in the process. That's the sad part. And these colonels and generals sit up top, acting like emperors, and they lose empathy. And I'll tell you what, there's a very famous general in the Marine Corps, and I'll name him, General Amos. He was the commandant of the Marine Corps. That guy has relieved more officers and destroyed more families than probably our enemies have.
Hmm.
What I mean by is destroying families. And it's really pathetic when we turn on our own and we become cannibals, right? So organizations like yourself protect us from cannibals. That's the way I see it, in the brief introduction that you've done. Please go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to just what you were talking about. I know this is jumping ahead a little bit to uh, impact to morale,
Yeah.
and the person, the full person. And there's a rather shocking statistic that came out. The DoD actually published in their DoD annual suicide something report,
Yeah.
DODSER, DoD SER. And this is for the last fiscal year, showed that the statistic was that of the active duty suicides for this last fiscal year, 29% of those active duty suicides were undergoing some sort of administrative or legal process, whatever that is. And you think about, I mean, that is a shocking statistics. Every single person that I have personally spoken with or that I have been helping through the foundation, every single person, including myself, including Ryan, have suffered from some sort of mental, emotional stress impact of this process because it is so opaque, it is so terrifying, and you have so little control of this entire process. Your friends are turning, people you thought were your friends are turning against you
Yes,
because
absolutely. Yeah.
they don't want the hammer to come down on
Yeah.
them. You're being told, so I was initially told incorrectly. I was initially told when I was placed on investigation, you cannot PCS, you can't move, you cannot retire, you
Yeah.
cannot receive an award, you cannot go to school, and you cannot take leave. And so when I was still under this thing, my grandmother was very, very ill and she ended up passing away. And I was not able to go to her because I was under this thing. I mean, and that still bothers me a lot. Like get a little emotional on the eyeballs there. But I mean, that's terrible. And after that happened, and I brought that up, I'm like, why is it that I was not? And the commander just nonchalantly, like, what are you talking about, Francesca? You can take leave. You could have gone to see your grandma before she died. And I'm like, but sir, you told me I couldn't.
What a piece of
Oh
shit. I
well,
mean, that's pathetic.
yeah,
What a piece of shit.
yeah, right. And so another one of a person that was helping or not helping actually.
Yeah.
He reached out. This stuff happened to him in the early 2000s, but he reached out to just talk to me about it as kind of a case study, right? And we'll get to that, to kind of case study trends next. He he was a defense attaché. He was actually in Asia, and there was a lot of issues going on at the embassy. And there's a congressional that came out. He spoke to one of the people, staffers, congressional staffers. They came back to DC, told DIA about it, and then just this whole world started it. He was under attack, right? And under attack so much so that even though the investigation against him had been unsubstantiated, because of course they did the easy one, toxic leadership. That's the easy throwaway thing, right? Even though that it had been unsubstantiated, all this stuff, he submitted for retirement because he's like, just like you when we were talking before the show started, I'm done. They denied his retirement because they started another investigation against him because they wanted to get him on something.
Yes, same
to
thing
get
happened
him
to
on
me.
something, right?
Absolutely.
So he is in a hotel in Fort Belvoir area. I don't think he was on base, but anyways, he's in a hotel in Fort Belvoir. He is in the bathtub with a gun in his mouth. And the only reason, he's telling me all that, the only reason he does not commit suicide is because he has not seen his brand new first child, was son. And the reason he had not seen this child is because his wife was overseas. She was originally from the Philippines, U.S. citizen, but her family was in the Philippines. They're getting ready to have the baby, and so she wanted to be near family and all this stuff. So she's in the Philippines, and his unit refuses to allow him to go on leave for the birth of his first child, and continues to refuse to allow him to go on leave even after she has the child because he's under investigation. And I think at the point when he said he had the gun in his mouth, it was his son was about 6 months old. That's how long he had been denied to see his child. And you can do that. It's insane. It's absolutely insane that you can do that inside the system. And a lot of people have had for we have this newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted. We have it up on LinkedIn and Instagram and whatnot. And we talk about a lot of these issues, and we talk about the administrative system, how opaque it is, how you have no rights, there's no procedural law. It's just it's insane, right? And I've had a lot of people come back to me and say, well, Francesca, or I know you don't know anything about the military. A lot of people think because I'm a woman, I was never in the military. I know you don't know anything about the military, but just so you know, you have the right to demand a court martial. So all this administrative stuff you're talking about, it doesn't matter. You have the right to demand a court martial. That's how our system works. The fact of the matter is, you really don't.
There's no review. Yeah.
Well, I actually, one of a gentleman that the foundation was helping, chatting with, and is actually got some good justice out of it. Not because of us. He had a lawyer. He had a shockingly good lawyer who I recommend people to him quite a bit. But Captain Bradley Geary, Navy SEAL, and he and I co-wrote a paper for a newsletter that's basically, so you have 3 tiers of justice, 3 tiers of punishment, I should say. You have administrative punishment, your non-judicial punishment, and then your court-martial punishment. If you are in administrative punishment system, there is no way to demand NJP.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah.
You're just there, right? So you can have a board of inquiry or an administrative separation board for enlisted. There's no way to get to here, court-martial, where the rules of evidence actually apply. There's no way to get there, right? If you're an NJP, you can demand a court-martial.
Sure.
But if you read the manual for courts-martial, do you know what it says? It says, yes, you can demand a court-martial, and your commander can deny it. And what happens when your commander says, no, I don't want you coming over here? And you know why they don't want you going over there? Because they probably don't have the evidence. The evidence will not stand up in court. They will not stand up in court. And all the evidence has to come out in court-martial, right? So if you're an NJP and you say, I demand my right to a court-martial, commander says, denied. You know what happens? You don't go back to NJP where you actually have some rights, not many, but you have some. If your court-martial is denied, you go back to administrative punishment where you have no rights. I mean, it's just kind of like, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, so you're set up for failure regardless, right? I mean, that's the
100%.
bottom line.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unless if you can go on the offense and go on the offense early.
But you can't, though. I mean, if you really think
Oh, you
about
can.
it. No,
Oh, you can.
it depends. I think depends on your position, and it depends on if the commanding general, who's really the adjudicating authority, is on your side or not. If the commanding general is deciding what's going on and forcing the decision down, there's no way in hell you can do anything. And I was one of these guys. I had a 3-star that was making these decisions, and that guy was such a scumbag. He never called me in and asked me my side of the story. He had because it was administrative. Now he had a fiduciary leadership responsibility to call me in and say, "Hey, Con, what the hell's going on?" He never did.
Yep.
And all they do is they keep throwing these charge sheets at you, and they don't find you. There's no evidence to convict you for assault or conduct unbecoming an officer using profanity. So all of a sudden they look bad because they relieved you for that, right? Supposedly.
Right.
So now
Right.
to find something else, they start another investigation. So this thing never ends. It just keeps going.
Or they don't even have to, actually. They can just give you in the Army, it's a general officer memorand of reprimand.
And
So
yeah,
GOMAR, or in the Air Force, a letter of
sure.
reprimand.
Yeah.
Or they don't even have to, and that goes into your file, or
Yeah.
they don't even have to do that. They can even just, you can be found in the DC area. Apparently we have an I'm sure it's more than just the DC area, but I know this statistic DC area.
Right.
We have a bad trend where if an officer is brought to a court martial for some sort of sexual misconduct, whatever it is,
Right.
even if the court martial finds that the officer is not guilty of whatever the sexual misconduct is, completely clear,
Yeah.
no convictions whatsoever, the officer will then immediately go into a board of inquiry.
Yes.
Administrative process, board of inquiry. All the same evidence will be there.
Yep.
The officer will still be discharged from the service, regardless of where they are in retirement, and will be gone, administratively gone. Yeah. Because the logic behind it is, well, this officer already has so much attention on them for the good order and discipline, we're going to remove said officer. And you're like, where is the good order and discipline in that? That's just not. Anyways, so case trends, something we've seen. Yes. So we've kind of talked about it quite a bit, or we've talked around it. So we've helped about 500 people. We had about 40 people who were willing to spell their stories out, and we take this data to Congress. So of these 40 people, here are some case trends that we've seen. Retaliation for reporting misconduct, 28 people. Due process failures, 35 people. Conflicts of interest, 24 people. Untimely investigation, so there's drag on for decades, or not a decade, years. 31 people. IG delegation to subordinate IGs. So basically you go to the IG, it meets one of those 4 categories that the IGs investigate, which is something we'll get into later, with complainant people going to the IG thinking that whatever, they're going to investigate. No, they're not. They only investigate 4 things. And that senior level IG, say the DOD IG, which is responsible for whistleblower retaliation, reprisal investigations, say they're the executive agent for it. They say, you know what? No, we're not going to do this. We're going to send this back to your installation IG to investigate. You're done. And then, so 19 cases out of those 40. And then mental health impact, moral injury. That's people who have had suicidal ideations, people who are on sufferings from some sort of diagnosed PTSD, something like that. 26 people. I mean, those are just out of that. Out of those, that 40 people, and then you can sample data wise, you can then expand that to those 500, and the numbers are going to look the same. And that's huge. So those are some case trends that we've seen across these processes, which directly support the number that the DoD itself gave, that of the active duty suicides in the last fiscal year, 29% of those people were undergoing some sort of administrative or legal process.
That's mind-blowing numbers. I mean, when you talk about leadership in a command, I mean, it just washes away everything that we talk about, and that we're trained as officers to take care of. And now, out of these 40, how many were enlisted and how many were officers?
I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it
Yeah.
was a healthy mix of both.
Was it? Yeah.
And up to the most junior, I think, is E6 up to a couple of O6s. So the whole range.
And these were not sexual misconduct cases, or was that
Everything.
everything mixed in there? Okay.
Everything. Fraud, waste, and abuse, sexual misconduct, safety violations,
Retaliation.
whatever. Yeah. Everything.
That's amazing. I've never even,
Mhm.
it's mind-blowing stuff. I mean, I remember when I was relieved, they called me in, and at that point, I really didn't care because, I had my retirement paper in. It was just it's like, who says divorce first, I guess, in other words, right? And,
Mhm.
whatever, fine. So they called me in and, they say, hey, you're going to be relieved. So I said, fine, no problem. And because I really didn't give a shit, and at the end, what really bothered me was this scumbag had the audacity to ask me if I was suicidal. And he didn't ask me because I was suicidal to care about how I felt. He asked me to cover his own ass.
Yep.
That's the type of people we're dealing with. They're weasels. They're scumbags. And I literally, and I looked at him, and and I got this stare. I looked at him. I just said, you know what? You got to be shitting me. You got the balls to ask me a question like that? I'm tempted to reach across his desk and do something to you, and I walked off, and then there's another claim that they tried to say, he threatened me. Yeah, screw off, get the hell with you, you mean nothing to me. But that's the type of people you're dealing with. They're scumbags. And it's very unfortunate, but they play this, hey, I'm a lofty leader and all this stuff. They're not. They'll lie to get awards. They'll lie on operational reports. They'll lie on situation reports to make themselves look good. To get to the next command, get to the next level. And that's the motivation for them. They really don't give a shit about, the younger troops. And I'm not talking about people at our level, because we're mature enough, we know the system, and all that stuff. We work within the system. But when you're a young troop, you have no recourse. You have no clue.
Well, and you have no clue. I mean, when I was being reprised against, I was an 05 with over 20 years of service. But because I was strategic intelligence, I had been outside of the command track for a decade plus. So I can tell you about satellites. I can tell you about image quality. I can tell you about all these. I can tell you about electronic signatures, whatever, right? I did not conceptualize that I was being reprised or retaliated against until June of 2023 when I spoke with Ryan.
Yes.
Because I don't, I think of retaliation or reprisal as something that you see in the Washington Post of some person was a whistleblower. And I think of a whistleblower. Most people think of a whistleblower as someone who identifies, I don't know, $40 million missing or something, right? And they go to the press or they go to whatever, and they're a whistleblower. And this is something else. I guess I'll actually mention this with investigative missteps. Is most people, including myself, until I started doing this work, do not realize that there are different rules when it comes to being a whistleblower as a federal civilian versus a whistleblower as a military member. Right. Any military member that makes any protected communication, by protected, I mean to your chain of command or to someone in your supervisory chain, if it's a pseudo chain of command, makes a communication about something bad, whatever the bad is, whether it's fraud, waste, or abuse, or it's bullying, or it's theft, whatever, right? Or sexual misconduct, whatever, right? Any communication to one of these people or an IG or a member of Congress, whatever, That is whistleblowing. You are now a whistleblower. I didn't even think of myself as a whistleblower until I talked to Ryan, because I'm like, what are you talking about? That's these people over here. No, that's me. I was a whistleblower, right? And so then when things start to happen to you after you make this protected communication, whatever it is, if you don't know, first of all, that you're a whistleblower, and then you don't know, and then if you don't know, first of all, you're a whistleblower, you cannot then conceptualize even that you're being reprised against. What does that even mean? Or you're being retaliated against. What does that even mean? Right? Federal civilians, very different. Federal civilians, you have to make certain types of communications about certain issues to certain people to be categorized as a whistleblower. And if you don't have these things first, then what happens after may or may not be reprisal, depending on what happened first, right? So there's just a lot of, and one other statistic I should have mentioned earlier, forgive me for bouncing a little bit on this, is for the investigative missteps. We talked about the conflicts of interest, the bias, the rules of evidence or lack of rules of evidence, how you interview, whatnot. One of the other shocking statistics is within the Department of Defense. This is from a congressional research study report. Within the Department of Defense, out of all of the complaints of reprisal that were even investigated, because not everyone is investigated, they'll just say, oh, I'm not even going to look at it. 2.41% are substantiated. Think about that for a second. That is the Department of Defense IG saying 97 something percent of people, service members, federal civilians, whoever, 97% of people-ish who are making a complaint of reprisal retaliation are liars.
That's unbelievable. I mean, how can
Those
that
numbers
be?
don't add up. How can that be? Conflicts of interest, bias, the person making the person initiating the investigation is the convening authority, is the judge, jury, executioner, etc. That's how it can be.
I mean, that's like saying you have a 97% conviction rate if you flip it on its head. How can that be?
Yep,
You know,
exactly.
I think, just listening to you, uh, I think the issue, what Ryan pointed out, was you're sort of mirror imaging your trust in the chain of command, right?
100%.
Because you would have acted in a certain way, so you had this implicit trust in them, when in
100%.
reality it was betrayal, and they
Correct.
they weren't looking out for your interests whatsoever. You know, they
Right.
just wanted to get you out of the equation, so they continue to do whatever the hell they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important, and that's why you need somebody impartial, and an organization like yourselves who has experience to remind people of that and to forewarn them early on, so they can go on the offensive and do the things that they need to do to protect themselves and their family. I think that's so
Yep.
important. I mean, that's a big takeaway for me right here. Yeah, please continue on.
Well, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about is proposed legislation.
Yep.
And so one of the many things that makes our organization unique, aside from the fact that we help uniform active duty service members, National Guard, Reserve, because most advocacy organizations, they only help veterans. So we're in the fight, is that we do the client work, but we also engage with Congress.
Right.
And a piece of legislation based on a study that we did in between 2023, 2024, where we got those trends and those case studies that I mentioned a little bit earlier, is we saw really 6 major themes of issues that we've seen across all of the investigations, all the client work that we've done, all the people we've advised, spoken with. Number one is, and we've touched on all of these somewhat, a lack of due process and transparency throughout the whole process. Conflicts of interest due to inspectors general and command appointed investigating officers working for or in subordination to the commanders. The inadequate training of IGs and command appointed investigating officers. A lack of timeliness in the investigations. The link to the military suicide and mental health epidemic, and normalization of deviance, where it's we always walk past the piece of trash. So what's the big deal? It's just another piece of trash, right? So from those 6 themes, we proposed 4 remedies. One of the remedies, the big kahuna of the remedy, is to have the IG be fully independent of the Department of Defense and fully independent of the IG, or excuse me, of the Coast Guard. So when we're saying that, we're not saying leave the current structure in place, make a new structure. We're saying take the current structure, remove it entirely, so the IG is not subordinate to the SecDef and the service
Chiefs.
service chiefs or the installation commanders. They are an entirely separate entity with investigative authority, and for both the DoD and the Coast Guard. And that's huge, multi-year everything. And President Trump actually in I believe it was March of 2024 video that he published, that was point number 6, I believe, of the ways that he thinks that the federal government needs to be fixed. I can see a huge question in your head.
Yeah, who would the IG report to in that case?
So that's the $60,000 question. There are options that we're thinking through. There's layers to the question. The first question is really, what branch of government does the IG report to?
Right.
Do they report to the legislative branch, executive branch, or judicial branch? We think they should report to the executive branch, but there's still issues in there, right? Because that's where everything sits right now, is inside the executive branch. We think that within the executive branch, you could take the IG Act of 1978, which normalized IG law across all federal agencies, and update the IG Act of 1978 so that all IGs for all federal agencies, just like President Trump said, are outside of those organizations, and you could have a separate organization that is their sole purpose, is investigating. So it's essentially an IG agency, probably not an agency, but something like that, right? And that IG organization would have investigative authorities, whether Department of Commerce and have specialties and people who specialize in different things, right? Department of Commerce or Department of Education or Department of Defense, etc. Or you could have just the IG for the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard be a separate organization, so a separate body from the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard. Reason being that if you're found guilty, or if an allegation is substantiated against you in the Department of, say, Commerce for whatever, so we'll say harassment, right? An allegation substantiated against you for harassment, there's no real knock-on career impacts for you, per se. You cannot be administratively separated through a board of inquiry and have an other than honorable discharge. If you are found substantiated harassment in the Department of Defense, you can be administratively separated with a board of inquiry and an other than honorable discharge. So there's just totally different authorities, and yet the authorities of the DoD IG and all of the other IGs are counted as the same concept within this Act of 1978. Another idea is to have the IG sit under the legislative branch, potentially with the Government Accountability Office. Maybe, right? So it's a $60,000 question. We don't have the answer, but we have some ideas and we have ways of asking the questions to get to the answer. We're 3 or 4 people, so we haven't done the exhaustive study of everything that needs to be studied to say where exactly should it fit, but we have questions to ask.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, so the Act of 1978 established 13 IGs, right? And those 13 IGs grew to like 71 now. And President Trump just fired like 19 of them, which is very common. Every administration has done. I mean, because it really falls under the executive branch. But putting it under the legislative branch, again, who's in charge of it? Was it going to be a House subcommittee, a committee in the House? Why not put it underneath the judiciary?
Yes, that is another idea. If we remove the Ferris Doctrine, if the Supreme Court reverses the Ferris Doctrine, with the Ferris Doctrine being a 1950 Supreme Court case decision that said that service members cannot sue the federal government for anything that can be categorized as incident to service.
Right.
It was intended as something that made it so that if you're in combat, you can't sue your commander for making a decision you can't sue for operation. Makes sense, right? Does not make sense in our opinion, and actually several Supreme Court justices' opinion. Clarence Thomas actually came out recently with a very strong dissent on the Ferris Doctrine. You cannot sue for, it makes no sense to not be able to sue for medical malpractice as an example. Why is it that you can walk into Walter Reed for a surgery and then never walk out of Walter Reed again because of a series of medical mistakes, known medical mistakes, and there's nothing you can do about it? And the response is, well, you have VA benefits. Really?
Yeah. I mean, come on.
Really? So yes, judicial branch, if the Ferris Doctrine and if the Westfall Act get relooked and readjudicated. Westfall Act being that the United States government has the right to use lawyers from the Department of Justice anytime the federal government is sued. And so as an example, when a four-star general, General Hyten, was being sued by an 06 Colonel Spetzler, I always mess up her name, I feel terrible about that. When he was being sued by an 06 for sexual assault, the federal government used Department of Justice lawyers to defend him, and she had to pay lawyers out of pocket.
Yeah, I mean, it's equitable, right?
Right. So our taxpayer money is being used to defend this guy.
Yeah.
And she actually did win the government actually settled because the Ninth Circuit Court determined that Ferris Doctrine does not apply. It's terrible this has to be said, but apparently sexual assault is not incident to service. And that actually had to be said because the government, of course, is trying to keep this out of the courts because, well, everything that happened to her is incident to service, Ferris Doctrine. So the Ninth Circuit Court said, no, sexual assault is not incident to service. Therefore, we have jurisdiction. It was the point in the case where they were determining who had jurisdiction or if they did have jurisdiction. Ninth Circuit Court said, we do have jurisdiction, at which point they would have gone into the discovery process when all the evidence would have had to come out. And the federal government said, nope, we settle.
And you don't want to go through discovery. Yeah.
So they settled for just shy of $1 million. Guess who pays that just shy of $1 million? Well, but who's the government?
Taxpayers do. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So we paid to defend this guy, and then we paid to settle after the government said, well, we don't want to go into discovery.
And what happened to that scumbag? 4-star retired?
He retired. 4-star retired. It's probably on some board somewhere.
Unbelievable. I mean, this is unconscionable. I mean, honest to God, this is absolutely unconscionable what you're saying. And most people don't realize this stuff, because this is up in the ether, right? Way up there, and people don't have time, energy, or the mental aptitude to go through and sift through all this information because you really have to do a lot of research to come up to some reasonable conclusions. And and that's one of the reasons why this channel has sort of taken off, because one, it's authentic, and I say it exactly the way it ought to be said. There's no BS whatsoever, and I'll go do the research. I'll get all the information, and I'll present it in a cogent manner, 10, 15, 20, or in some cases an hour-long podcast, so people can draw their own conclusions. But most people don't have the time to do that. I mean, they're just trying to make a living and feed their families. And
Yeah.
if they're isolated from these events, then the powers to be continue to march and do the things that they continue to do. So the issue about getting back to the IG is, where does IG really belong? I'm not quite sure what the right answer is, and you're absolutely right. I mean, you really have to think it through where it really belongs, because it has to be a protected organization. It has to be an organization with some teeth.
Hmm.
When it comes out with a decision, that it can be implemented. It's not one of these you can just sweep it under the rug type thing. And I think those are really important factors. And it has to have a public transparency. I think that's very important. Right now, what happens is, oh, we relieve them for lack of trust and confidence. Well, what the hell does that mean? And where's the
Right.
lessons learned in that? If I did something wrong, charge me by all means, and then publish it so the next con doesn't do it, right? That's how
Yep.
we get better. But what we do is we hide it, and the reason we're hiding is to protect the organization. That's the main reason, to protect the military. The military, I hate to say this, I am very, very patriotic. I mean, I have copies of the Constitution all over, and I travel with it. I mean, I fundamentally believe in it. But the problem is, it's rotting from the core, because
Mhm.
it's run by careerists at the end of the day, who care about their career progression, and they care about the institution, to safeguard the institution for their own benefit. So when they retire, they can get these high-paying jobs at the military-industrial complex. That's the game
Mhm.
that they're playing. And
Yep.
if you're one of the chosen one that you got brought into that circle, you're going to do fine. But if you're not, you know, you're pushed out and you're a roadkill. You're not worthy of their time, or them to call you in and say, "Hey, are you okay?" Or the Lieutenant Colonel Schiller, when he had a episode, when he's calling for accountability, he's absolutely right. The way he went about it, that's debatable. But nobody called him in and put his arm around him and say, "You okay, stud? Let's talk about this." Maybe he was having a mental episode, maybe, but he was right. And if somebody sat down with him and said, "You're right, and we need to look at accountability in Afghanistan, and we will look at it," the Afghanistan War Commission is looking at it, and the Big Brother routine. But what they did was to silence him. They threw him pretrial confinement. Then they special court martial, and they copped a plea. I mean,
Yep.
so he pled guilty to horseshit charges, lost his retirement, lost his family. Think about that. But karma has a way of biting back, right? Guess where he's working now? Do you know?
He is the I just saw his post on LinkedIn yesterday. I
Yeah,
think he's the
in
undersecretary
OSD.
personnel and something
Yeah,
something.
he's
And he
SES and OSD. I love it.
SES Schiller.
Yeah, I
It
love
cracked
it.
me up.
Yeah, I
He
thought it
what
was
did he
fantastic.
say?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
what did he say?
So there, so that's what happens in this case. Now, let's take my case, which is, everybody in the Marine Corps knows about it. Uh, Wildly successful battalion, no fratricide incidents. At the same time, exact same time, another battalion in Afghanistan. They call it a mortar fire mission. The round lands on one of the companies. They lie for 3 freaking years. The Marine Corps lies about it. Says it was due to enemy action. 2 Marines and an Iraqi interpreter killed. Over a dozen Marines and soldiers wounded. And the Marine Corps lied. And if it wasn't for Mary Tillman, Pat Tillman's mother, this would have never come to the surface. And then the Commandant of the Marine Corps, or the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, Magnus, comes in front of Congress, a 4-star, and says, "Hey, we're sorry. We misinformed Congress." You freaking lied. You belong in jail, mister.
Yep.
But it's a different set of standards, different rules, unfortunately, right? And
Yeah, no, one of our articles I was doing research on the My Lai massacre,
mhm.
and the My Lai massacre cover up for over a year. Do you want to know one of the little pieces of forgotten history? Do you want to know who the investigating officer was for the allegations of the My Lai massacre? When the warrant officer came into the talk and said, "Hey, people are being
Yeah,
butchered by
yeah.
U.S." Do you want to know who the investigating officer was?
Probably the company commander.
Major Colin Powell.
No way.
Uns Unsubstantiated. Nothing to see here.
And what was he in
Major,
the battalion as an XO?
he was battalion, I think XO, yeah. Yep.
Holy shit. And he was in that battalion where that massacre happened.
He might have been just in the
In
brigade,
the
but
brigade headquarters.
he
Yeah.
was there.
Yeah, I need to
He was
research
there.
this.
Yeah. Major Colin Powell. He was the now obviously it's he does the investigation. Commander is the one that makes the decision, right? But the investigation determined that nothing to see here. That's what I saw from my research on it. Someone on the channel might say, "No, I was there, and there's a FOIA and this is exactly what it said." Okay, I would love to see that
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Yeah.
when I saw that, I was just like, are you
I
kidding
think
me?"
I'll do an episode on this. Thank you. Yeah.
Forgotten history right there. But I undoubtedly sidetracked to 7 ways from Sunday, but the legislative reform. So the legislative reform, one of the things that we're doing for our engagement with Congress is we propose legislation specifically to get after one of the things we've talked about earlier, which is the lack of training, lack of standardized, measurable, accountable training for investigating inspectors general, and then certainly no training for investigating officers of how to do an investigation. So we propose some legislation specifically on that for increased and improved training. We've been talking to members of the House Armed Services Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, the HISGAC, which is the Homeland Security Government Accountability Committee, and the Senate and the House Oversight Committee to try to push this legislation through. It's my first attempt at trying to get a piece of legislation into the National Defense Authorization Act, and some lessons learned, certainly, that hopefully we can get aspects of it into the NDAA, but I don't think we're going to get the whole thing in there, which is in retrospect understandable. I made it too big, there's just too much to it. So learning our way through that one.
What, talk
Ryan
to talk to us
actually,
about some of the challenges that you've experienced dealing with these committees in Congress.
oh, it's fascinating. So the Game of Thrones of Congress is absolutely fascinating. Uh, Context, I've never done anything with Congress before like what I'm doing. I've briefed staffers before as an intel person, but not this nonsense. So in the IG world specifically, one of the first things to contend with is that back to the 1978 IG Act.
Mm-hmm.
The 1978 IG Act only talks to the Department of Defense IG, so the department level IGs. Those department level IGs are accountable to Title V, so United States Code Title V. That is the Senate Homeland Security Government Accountability Committee and the House Oversight Committee. Service IGs, very separate, they are accountable to Title X. That is the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee. So just even at that very, very basic level, you have 4 different committees that you have to engage with and try to, at the committee level, not even accounting at the member level, try to get any piece of legislation, regardless of what that legislation is, through and have agreement from 4 separate committees. Very difficult. Really, you could say 2 separate committees, the 2 Senate ones, because obviously it goes up through, but really it's 4 separate committees. You then have to, within those different committees, you have the committee level staff, which is your permanent staff. And then you have your personal staff, which is the staffers for the elected representatives. Sure. To get a meeting with a permanent staffer, it's not impossible, but it's a little bit tough because they're managing the chaos that is that committee, whether that committee is 30 people or that committee is 15 people, whatever it is, right? If you are able to get a meeting with a committee staffer, what you're essentially asking them is, I am asking you to carry the water to whoever the most influential members are on this committee, so that then they hopefully do a bipartisan or maybe not, but hopefully a bipartisan effort, and say, yes, we want this piece of legislation, and this is ultimately what the language is going to look like. You're asking a lot, because most from the committee staffers, it's not impossible, but you're asking a lot. Because in addition to me, Walk the Talk Foundation, they also have 30 other people every day coming to them and saying, my issue is the most important thing. I want you to carry the water. So how do they actually know what to prioritize? Then you have your personal staffers. Your personal staffers, if the committee staffer has, say, 20 to 30 interest groups coming to speak with them every day, the personal staffers have 40 to 50 interest groups coming to speak to them every day. And maybe not even interest groups, but constituents, concerned constituents about whatever the issue is, right? So then how do they decide, as the committee staffer, what they're actually going to present to the boss and say, hey, boss, we think that this is important for you right now to engage with? As a foundation that talks to defense-related issues, inside of every staff, personal staff, we'll say, so elected representative staff, there's a typical structure. There's a typically like chief of staff, a legislative affairs person, a person who engages on constituent issues, whatever, and then a person who engages on defense issues, typically, especially if they're a member of the HASC or the SASC or the HISGAC or the HOS. Oftentimes, that defense person is what's called a defense fellow. So that's typically an 04 major from one of the services who is there in Congress for a year-long tour as a defense fellow, and it's a very prestigious job. And they are really a spy for the Department of Defense or the Coast Guard to find out ahead of time before it gets to the floor for a vote, and to influence ahead of time before it gets to the floor for a vote what Congress is proposing as legislation. When I go to talk to one of these staffers, depending on what personal staff it is, I know immediately whether or not the staff, as it got through my request, my office request, got through whatever layer of process they have. I know almost immediately whether or not they are going to take me seriously. If they take me seriously, most likely, not always, they will have me speak to one of the staffers who is, say, the national security advisor or the legislative assistant, a non-military person, so the non-defense fellow. If they are not terribly serious, or they just don't understand it because I communicated it poorly, what I wanted to speak about, I'll speak to the defense fellow. Now, this is not me bashing defense fellows. I love them dearly. They're wonderful people. I get that. But I am coming to you, defense fellow 04 major, who is on a Benny assignment, benefits assignment, because you're awesome and you believe the party line. And I'm telling you, the party line is flawed. There's a lot of issues and they need to be fixed. How many majors are going to then go and be like, you know what? Right? Right?
It's not going to happen.
Right. So those are just some baseline challenges. And then you have like our proposed legislation. I think it's great. I think it addresses everything that needs to be addressed as far as I could understand it. We sent it out for coordination. We got a ton of feedback on it. But there's so many issues, right? And I didn't know going into this process that the way this process works is I've never worked legislation. I'm not a lobbyist. Our foundation, we're not lobbyists. By law, we're not allowed to lobby. So I don't have lobbyists. I've never done lobbying before. I didn't know the normal process is first you ask for 3 to 4 sentences of appropriations. Don't try to change the NDA up front. You ask for 3 to 4 sentences of appropriations of, right, please do a study, or Department of Defense, how do you think it would work? How much do you think it would cost if you had standardized training across the board for your IGs, and if your IOs, command and point investigating officers, received any training? How much do you think that would cost? And so basically use the appropriations process, very, very short things, language, to help you gather the data that you need to then be able to present the larger piece of legislation. Say, hey, based on this data that you've given us, DoD or Coast Guard, here's the things that we think need to get fixed.
Yeah,
So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's exciting,
but
and it's
at the same time, you're competing with companies like
the
Boeing,
Eskimos in Texas.
Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics. I mean, it's I mean, there's only so many minutes in a day, right? And
Correct.
if you get 15 minutes or half an hour to give your pitch, he's thinking in the back of his mind, where are the PAC funds coming from?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
and you being a nonprofit, you're not
I mean,
you're
but
not on the
I
field. You're on the sidelines, but you're trying to get on the field. You're trying to get some playing time, right?
darn
That's
right.
what you try to do, and that's through hard work. That's through knocking on doors. But I'll tell you what, if you're Lockheed Martin, you call, the personal staff. They would love to talk to Lockheed Martin,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. But you know what? I am between I am the wealth of eternal optimism and
And you're a
bulldog.
fighter. I mean, I mean,
Gonna get
yeah,
this.
you're a fighter. So I get it, because you can be very nice and smiley, or you can put on the other game face and go in there and let them know what you feel like. And I saw one of the posts that you put on LinkedIn. I got big kick out of it. Uh, so at the end of the day, I think the legislative process is going to be very, very cumbersome, and it's going to take a lot of time. And I think you're right in the sense that, hey, get a couple line items in there, establish a pattern, establish credibility, and then go from there. Another way of doing it, if I may throw that out, is have a membership. And you don't need to have paid members, but if all of a sudden Walk the Talk has got 100,000 members, you've got some wasta, right? I mean,
Hmm.
right? And then you've got clout, because they realize, especially when they look, if you're going to go talk to, you know, Marsha Blackburn, Tennessee, and she looks, hey, we have 10,000 members in Tennessee. She's going to talk to you. You ain't going to, the chief of staff will talk to you. So that's another way of creating influence, right? Indirect influence. So that's something to consider. I would throw that out there, and just start a membership. Just, hey, come join Walk the Talk if you care about military issues, and it's no cost or whatever. A buck a year, whatever it is. Whatever it may be. And I think that's very important to
Yeah.
get influence, right? So yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, thank you. So the next topic, man, I've taken so many notes. I haven't taken this many notes since I was in the Marine Corps. This is great. I love it. The next thing we want to talk about,
What do complainants do that lead to low unsubstantiation rates?
yeah, let's go for it.
First thing complainants do is they don't know, and I count myself in this, they don't know what IGs do typically.
Right.
So IGs investigate four things: fraud, waste, and abuse of authority, reprisal, and restriction. Those are the four things that IGs investigate. When you go to an IG office and you say, I received a bad OER or evaluation,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't think that I should have received this evaluation, the IG is going to say, if you characterize it in that way, the IG is going to say, okay, you need to go back to your command and they will do an investigation. Where do you think that investigation is going to end up? Unsubstantiated. You
Right.
now have a target on your back because you're a whiny person who didn't like your eval. If instead you go to the IG and say, I received a bad evaluation after I told my boss that I thought that the way that we were handling whatever exercise could lead to service member injury. And after I reported that or had that conversation with my boss, months later, whatever, I received this bad evaluation. I think that this is an abuse of authority or reprisal for my having made that protected communication. All of a sudden, the IG, it falls squarely in their lane, and they are responsible for investigating that. Which IG will investigate it, that's a totally separate matter. If they delegate it down to your unit or installation level IG, then
Right.
probably the same outcome. So the basically what I'm trying to say is, so when you go to speak to a doctor, as an example, it's a really good idea if you have an idea, or if you know how to speak the words to the doctor that the doctor understands in their nomenclature of, okay, from what you're saying, I can diagnose this thing or have an idea where to go for what test. Same thing with the IG. IGs do not, as a rule, we've noticed, or they are not responsible, I should say, for helping guide you on to target. They are not responsible for when you come to them and say, well, I received a bad evaluation. They're not responsible for asking you follow-on questions to determine whether or not your complaint falls within their realm.
Mm-hmm.
So complainants need to know, what do IGs investigate, and how do I characterize, how do I go to the right place for this issue that I'm having? Otherwise, they're kicked back and they're upset and, nothing happens, right? The other issue is that we are all the heroes in our own personal movie.
Mm-hmm.
So we know for a fact that our 300 pages of evidence is in fact evidence, and also will clear us entirely of whatever the allegation is against us if we're the subject of the investigation, or even if we're the complainant. Like, here's my 300 pages of evidence that this person did all this bad stuff, right? So we hand these 300 pages to whatever person and say, here's my evidence. We haven't sorted it. We haven't tagged it. We haven't pulled out information that's really not necessary, that the person doesn't need to invest time in. And we have not built a story. We expect, because we are the hero in our own story, and everything we do is right, we expect that IG or that investigating officer, if it's a command appointed investigating officer, to take all of this stuff and say, thank God I now have these 300 pages of stuff to go through that's going to prove the truth of the matter.
Mm.
Nobody's got time for that crap. Literally, no one. No one. Because every command appointed investigating officer, no matter how many times they say this is my primary duty, it's not. It's an additional duty.
Of course.
And they're still expected to do their day job, right? And IGs will have 7, 18 other cases they're investigating. If you're going to a defense attorney, they have, as you said, they have a stack of other people they're trying to help. If you go to Congress, like I'm filing a congressional. Okay, great. Here's my congressional. 17 pages of a diatribe and 400 pages of evidence. And then the congressional comes, what are you doing, man?
Yeah. No one's gonna read it.
No one's gonna read it because they ain't got time. It's not because they don't care. Some people don't care, but I think that very few people are in the realm of they don't care. They just no one's got time for that, right? Yeah. And so that's the second major thing that we see complainants or even subjects doing that leads to outcomes that do not achieve whatever it is that they would like to achieve. A third big thing is related to the first of, what do IGs actually investigate? When if you are the complainant and you are making a complaint, if you say, well, I was reprised against, or whatever the thing is, if you do not actually tell the IG or tell the EO or tell whoever what laws, policies, and regulations you think were violated, you're going nowhere. Because again, it is not the IG or the EO or whoever's responsibility, the JAG, maybe the JAG, depending on where you're sitting, or the congressional office's responsibility, nor do they have the time to say, okay, you're being reprised against, you say you're reprised against, that is in violation of 10 USC 1034 and DOD instruction, I think it's 7050.02. Great. And it's paragraph da da da. They are not going to do that work.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Would
fair.
you
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair that they're not going to do that. Nobody's got time for that, right? And because they're not going to do that work, if you're just using these broad terms in a 17 to 20 page narrative with no spaces in between,
Yeah.
you're taking the Jack Kerouac instead of the Ernest Hemingway approach. Always do the Ernest Hemingway approach. They're not going to look for it. They're not going to find it. It's just vomit on a page. With no specific laws, nothing to like latch onto. This is what's being violated. So that's the third major thing is you are not explicitly stating what laws, policies, or service regulations you think are being violated. And then the fourth major thing, and I'll stop after this, is you have the written spewing, and then you have the verbal you spewing. You go into an interview with whoever investigating officer is, if an investigation is actually started on whatever you've complained about,
Right.
or whatever the subject is, right? You go into an interview and you just start waxing poetical about all of your grievances and all of your unhappiness and all these things. And 3 hours in, the interviewer is exhausted and needs to go to the bathroom and has no idea anymore how this spaghetti chart of your life relates to this discrete issue that they were told to investigate. So the mistake is not rehearsing and not rehearsing what you're going to say and not actually putting together coherent thoughts of how you're going to communicate the discrete issue that you're concerned about.
Yeah, so I think one has to prioritize, right, for the investigating officer, what the main issues are, and walk the dog, right? And I think that's very important. And in creating a summary, and show them exactly what the issues are and how certain laws have been violated. Because you really have to do the job for the investigator, and then the investigator can take that and go forward with it. But if you're just going to spiel a bunch of gibberish out there, this rambling stuff, stream of consciousness, he's going to look at you like, what the hell's going on? And then they don't have time. I mean, that's 100% right. And they don't have the time. And, the other thing I think at the end of the day is having been an investigating officer, I had a lot of empathy. I was a tough Marine. I mean, I didn't mess around with any of this nonsense. But I always had empathy, and that's not taught a lot, right? You can't be a tough guy all the time. And a lot of times it would be just, you could diffuse the situation as an investigating officer by telling the Marine, hey, I got it. I'm with you. Let me solve the problem for you. So we don't need to go further, right? Because it's just gonna create paperwork for everybody to answer. And give me 72 hours. I'll come back to you. And then you go back to the command and say, hey, here's the bottom line. This is what this guy's saying. So you gotta represent the interests of the individual as well as the commands and mediate, right? Come up to a solution. And while protecting the Marine as well, because that's your incumbent right. And unfortunately, we don't teach this stuff, right? And and it's so simple what you're saying. I'm sitting here thinking, training. You could have videos, but then tests at the end of it that you self-certify that, hey, I've taken training as an investigating officer, I've self-certified, I'm good to go, right? And if you start that as a young officer, I remember getting all the JAG classes, and the Marine Corps got the basic school for officers, how to do investigations that. But it's a fire hose coming at you, right? I mean, I don't even know the rank structure in the Marine Corps, and they're giving me classes on manual for court martials and the UCMJ, and I'm just sitting there going, holy shit, I mean, how do I keep track of all this stuff? But you don't get the knowledge until you get the callus on your hands and you do investigations, you interact with the Marines and all that stuff. And I think that's so important. So I think the training I would certainly encourage, and maybe you guys can recommend, check with DoD if they have this online training system for investigating officers. If they don't, it's, it'll take a minimum amount of effort to get maximum amount of results. I mean, it's really that simple. And an organization like yourselves could help create something like that. So I think it's a great opportunity. That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear you guys are all over it. Okay, so the next one, I think we're going to talk about, man, this is interesting stuff. I'm loving it. Number 6, multi-tiered accountability. We kind of hit that before, didn't we?
We did.
Let's talk about it some more.
I guess there's two different types of multi-tiered accountability. There's the different levels of punishment, administrative, non-judicial, and then court-martial. And then there's the punishment for your juniors, punishment for your field grades, and your punishment for your general officers. And none of those necessarily are the same. And we know this. It's I mean, we see it in our award system. I remember my first deployment, we had the soldiers who were E4 and below, who were going outside the wire every day, were, for that deployment, they received I think an ARCOM, the Army Commendation Medal. The soldiers who were E7 and above, who were not going outside the wire every day.
Bronze Star. Or MSM.
Right. It doesn't make sense. And so the same thing can translate to the ranks as far as the punishment systems, where your junior level service member is harshly punished. Your mid-grade service members are potentially also harshly punished, and you're so I honestly kind of struggle with this question a little bit, just because of the work that we do, right? So you have people who have clearly done bad things, who are seniors. The one I mentioned to you earlier, when I was a company commander and I had a CW4 who forged my signature to receive $2,400 of money from the Army Emergency Relief Fund. And I went to my battalion commander. I said, "Sir, this is terrible. Forged my signature, stole money." And he said, "Well, she's getting ready to retire. I don't want to touch it." If that had been a junior person, done. Done. Right. But on the other hand, we also have people within our organization who are senior officers, senior enlisted, who somehow get on the wrong side of whoever is in charge, and they are administratively separated at 16 years of service as an E8, one of the people we helped, with a general under honorable conditions discharge, even though the administrative separation board, during the administrative separation board, showed that the sworn statements being used against him had been forged and falsified. And even though one of the witnesses being used against him was found during the ad sep board to be committing perjury, even though all of that was out there and was shown and was in the notes, he was still administratively separated with 16 years of service, no retirement, with a general under honorable conditions discharge. We also have 06s that we've helped, and general officers that we've helped, who somehow got on the wrong side of whatever system, and a bad piece of paperwork ends up in their file, letter of reprimand, GOMAR, page 7, page 13 for Navy, whatever. And they're now trying to retire, and their packet is going before a grade determination board to determine the last rank they served honorably, which is yet another administrative process, completely opaque. You have no idea who even sits the board. You don't even know what office it really goes into inside of the DoD or that service. And you could go from being a general officer to being forced to retire as a captain. And that can all happen, and because you got on the wrong side of somebody, whether you made a complaint or protect communication, even if you didn't go to the IG or whatever, right? So the different tiers of justice exist, yes, but we've also seen the same tiers, the abuses of authority and abuses of discretion are able to exist within the system because the system itself is so flawed. So it's not across the general officers don't get protected across the board, nor do 06s. I mean, look at Bradley Geary. That was, if anybody wants to look at that, it's insane what was going on with him. And he's Navy SEAL, Academy grad, special, all the stuff. But he got on the wrong side of somebody, and the system decided to go after him.
I think the issue really is, I think the concentration with everybody is, it's what really people get held accountable for. For the senior general officers, it's generally sexual misconduct, right? That'll get you in trouble in a heartbeat. It'll never be, I mean, lately we've seen that. So in the Air Force, there have been several generals have been, fired. Now, I'm not talking about the most recent firings, right? I mean, that's a whole separate issue. But generally speaking, I mean, and I've done several episodes on general officers being fired. There's most recent was the Army 4-star that tried to get a lieutenant colonel, command screen, whatever, stupid. So cases like that where just egregious abuse of authority, or it's sexual related, right? Making a pass at a subordinate or what have you. So that's at the most senior level. Then you get down to the 06s and below, 06s and 05s, they generally get relieved of command for lack of trust and confidence, right? Which is just a complete horseshit statement, which could be anything. I mean, it could be anything. The guy had bad breath, so I don't trust him anymore. And that's happened in combat also, and there's no recourse for it. So that's the second part. Or you're a captain of a ship. Just recently, they dropped an F-18 off the Truman. I don't know if you read that, and the same ship was involved. They lost another aircraft, which was shot down by Gettysburg. DDG fired a missile at it. Luckily the pilot didn't get killed. So and so people are going to get hammered for that, and sometimes it happens several months or even a year after. And there have been most recent cases where people have been relieved a year after the incident. The most recent was a Marine lieutenant colonel, F-35 pilot. That F-35 that took, do you remember that case? Where the plane went haywire. He's flying this F-35 at 750 feet. And all of a sudden the plane starts going haywire. He reboots it twice, 4 times he reboots the avionics in it. Tries to gain altitude and it goes haywire. And the procedure is, hey, bail out, this thing's going down. The plane continues to fly, and about several miles away, crashes into some field. The pilot ejects, lands in somebody's backyard. A year later, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps let him have the command, a very prestigious command in Arizona, and then a year later relieved him for an incident that happened a year ago, right? And why? Because the F-35 program is very important, right? It's a multi-hundreds of billions of dollars are committed to that program. So he gets relieved. So that's at the 06, 05 level, right? You get held accountable for stuff like that. I'm one of them. You're one of them. Then if you get down to the junior ranks, captain and lieutenants, it's primarily for personal misconduct, right? They're going to get hammered for. Drunken disorderly, DUI, or a safety violation on the ranges. So what happens at that level is people shy away from training. Why take the risk? Why take my company to a range and shoot all this live ammunition, get somebody shot or whatever, and know I'm going to get hammered? So that's what happens. Now, getting to the enlisted side, sergeant major is a protected rank. it's got to be fraternization or something stupid like that. They're going to get hammered for because they're ultimately, and I know I'm going to get hammered for this, but what does a sergeant major really do? I'm the senior enlisted advisor. What does that mean?
Mhm.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means. And I remember asking my sergeant major. I said, you're responsible for good order and discipline as a battalion. Anybody screws up, I'm going to be talking to you first. I mean, it's really that simple. So now you've got responsibility. You're responsible for the barracks. Make sure they're clean. If I walk through the barracks and dirty, I'm going to be talking to you first. So there's responsibilities. So sergeant major is protected. Now, what happens at the other senior staff NCO ranks, sergeant first class in the Marine Corps, gunnery sergeant, it's the captains and lieutenants. There's probably disorderly misconduct type issue, drunkenness, so they get hammered. But really, getting down to the troops, nobody cares about the troops. A troop is an hour late, like you said, he can go for NJP. And he may have a good excuse and ask for a court martial, and the command says, no, you're going to get hammered. And the troops they get put through the meat grinder. They get, trained hard, put away wet, and the slightest infraction, they're going to get hammered because we want to maintain the good order and discipline. Well, that's not how you maintain good order and discipline. You maintain good order and discipline is through positive leadership. It's through empathy. And by just keep hammering people, it's like finally they say, screw this, I'm not going to re-enlist, I'm out of here, and that's what typically happens. So going back to the morale question, which is the next one we're talking about, that impacts morale. So what have you seen that in terms of re-enlistments and people wanting to stay on? In your
Well, no, from what we see, the stuff that we deal with, the administrative processes, punishments, investigations, whatnot, there's a direct link between recruiting and retention and those processes. 100%. It's a negative direct link. There are very, very few people that have reached out to us that we have helped through our foundation who, at the end of whatever the process is that they're going through, they say, I want to stay in the military. It's typically a break point of, I am getting out of the military, and not only am I getting out of the military as quickly as possible, hopefully with my whatever rank, whatever intact, but I'm also not going to recommend the military to people around me. And with the military being very much of a family business, that not recommending the military to the people around you is that's huge. That is huge. I think the last study that I saw was over 60-something% of people exiting the military would not recommend the military to their family members or their friends. And that's huge because we're a family business. We're a blue collar family business, and that's just what we are as a service.
You've got family members in the military, so do I. My son was a Marine. He went to Naval Academy, Marine infantryman, served in Afghanistan. So I think that's so important.
It is. And going back to your previous discussion about the tiers of punishment, I agree with you that everything you're describing are the symptoms of the problem. That's how I would, that's why our foundation, the work that we do in our client work, we work through these symptoms. Our overall objective, however, is to go after the root causes, which we would say the root cause of what you're describing, those symptoms, in addition to professionalization of the force, education, morale, or excuse me, not morale, but morals, character, all of those things which we also know we could argue are concern within the service. The root cause that we go after is the administrative process, the administrative systems of injustice, we'll call them, that give commanders or leaders the flexibility to abuse authority and abuse their discretion in ways that they should not be able to, regardless of the rank, whether it's a general officer or an E1. It makes no sense that either one of those ranks can be punished so severely, again, other than honorable discharge, administratively separated, can be punished so severely and have no right throughout the entire process to review the evidence that's being used against them. It doesn't matter. E1 to O10, don't care. That root cause creates this ability for all these discrepancies and issues and these one-offs of, well, that general officer was protected. Yeah, okay. Well, these general officers weren't protected. Like the complaint that I had against a person, what started the reprisal against me, it would include a lot of things, but one of the things was sexual misconduct against this person. Not only was that complaint not handled correctly according to law, it was entirely discarded. So sexual misconduct is not, that's not a, from what I saw from working in the Pentagon for a number of years, is that for any person, general officer, SCS, whatnot, to actually get onto the chopping block for sexual misconduct specifically, there has to be numerous years of complaints and 5, 10 plus complainants who are courageous enough to come forward and deal with all the reprisal and career-ending retaliation they're going to face before that thing sticks. Numerous years of it to happen.
That's unbelievable.
Well, it's unbelievable, but yeah, so it's the root causes. Yes, you are not wrong, but you're also, I would say, not exactly right, because it depends. And it's this problem that allows that it's depends morass to exist.
Yeah, because I think I agree with you. The administrative processes allow the commander to abuse his authority, but that's the fundamental issue right there. Is the commanders have so much authority, and I mean, you take a look at an infantry unit where I've got the authority to tell a platoon, rifle company, squad, charge into fire, and if they don't do it, stand by, because I've got the authority, under the harshest of laws to shoot them. I mean, under the harshest of laws, right? And so, as a commander, especially as a battalion commander, you have the ultimate authority, and there's no recourse whatsoever. But you have to be trained to use that authority judiciously. I can't, honest to God, I don't remember maybe a handful of NJPs, Article 15s, I think you guys call it, maybe a handful in the battalion, because I did not feel it warranted destroying this young man's career for stupid mistakes. We all make stupid mistakes. And I'll tell you what some of the best leadership practices that I implemented as a company commander was I told my platoon commanders to go visit the Marines' families out in town. And the wives went ballistic. It's, they said, hey, you're infringing on my privacy. I said, not at all. You're helping me build a Marine Corps officer. Because this guy comes from, middle America. He goes home, sits in his lazy boy chair, has a beer, and he's watching a ball game. That Marine goes home at night eating a bologna sandwich while you have to go to Walmart to go work, and he doesn't get time to decompress. And if he's late for half an hour at work, we're going to hammer him. So help me teach my lieutenants empathy. And as soon as I said that, they were all aboard. They're inviting the lieutenants over, but it was a way to teach, what these young Marines go through. And they're the future of our military. It's not the senior leadership. They're at the end of their careers, right? And if we don't retain them, and the best thing you said, it's a family business. What a shame. And now the Army, there's a study, 54% of the officers that were qualified for command selection refused, said, do not consider me. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell's going on? And these are the issues that we need to tackle. And there's a reason for that. Because they're tired of, taking the risk, of loss of trust and confidence, and then have to go through the shame of being relieved, the shame their family has to go through. I did a very good podcast, if you have time, and I can mention his name because he did it publicly, Colonel Bianchi at West Point.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
At the end, he was found guilty of not stopping at a stop sign. That was it. All the other stuff got thrown out, and he went to federal court. And we destroyed his family, 27 years. And I talked to him at great length. I mean, he seemed like a decent, honorable, straight up dude, And he said, yeah, people maybe didn't like me for whatever reasons. Okay, I mean, that's fine. But we got to put all that stuff aside. There's no like or dislike in the military, right? We got to remain impartial, and we got to remain true to our oath. And that's what we forget.
Yeah, I think one of the things he said during your podcast with him that cracked me up, and it's so true as a West Point alum. He said there is nothing too petty to become an issue at West Point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, that's pretty funny. It's true.
and luckily I came through the OCS side pipeline, so for
Mhm.
us, it's we're sort of the half-bred, inbred type officers. But there's a need for everybody in the military, right? We're a big enough
Yeah.
organization that everybody can come from multiple venues. And I'm about to do another episode on do we really need, and this is getting a segue, do we really need military academies? We spend over $2 billion a year. $2 billion a year to graduate 3,000 officers, $2 billion. The average cost of a graduating officer is $666,000.
Yep.
That's a ton of money, right?
Ton of money.
And then as you go up the hierarchy, that this good old boys network or women's network happens in the military, and they protect each other. Huh? It's boys.
It's
Yeah,
boys.
I'm with you. It is. I mean, it's true. I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. So all this stuff is fascinating, and I think the beauty of it, organizations like yourself, and even this channel that's taken on, is we're exposing the truth to the American people, and they need to know the truth. It's very important because the military's got this curtain,
Yep.
across it, with all this, in my mind, with the color guards at football games and everything. And that's great for patriotism. I'm very patriotic. I only stand for America. I don't give a shit about any other country on this planet, right? But the American public needs to know the truth, and I think the truth sets you free.
Mhm.
That's the whole beauty about in our military, and we've all taken a sworn oath to be honest, integrity, courage. All these things mean a lot. And when you're talking about the award system, where a young troop, going out there risking his life every day, gets a Army Commendation Medal. When an officer did that, he'd get a Bronze Star with a V on it. I mean, probably, yeah. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and it's disgusting. It's disgraceful. It's not who we are. But everybody goes along to get along. That's the thing. You don't want to disrupt the boat, and you rock the boat, Francisco, you're going to get hammered. That's what exactly happened. They don't want people that are going to rock the boat, because water's going to come in. They'd rather just have, these sheep that we have, and everybody just goes along with the flock. Anyway, I've said enough on that note. Thanks for being on the show. I
Thank you
really
for
enjoyed
having
it. We're going to have you back. I really appreciate it. Seriously, took a lot of your time, and you educated us, and you certainly educated the viewers. I look forward to everybody's comments on this, and well, definitely, I really appreciate it. Do you have any closing
thank you.
comments or anything?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for spotlighting Walk the Talk Foundation, and shameless, absolutely shameless plug. We are, as of last month, approved as a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you would like to help us in the cause, please do visit our website at walkthetalkfoundation.org and or com. Now I'm forgetting. Oof, hold on one
I'll
second.
post the
Let me
link.
make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And .org, and give us a donation. All tax deductible. Shameless plug.
No, that's great.
And
I
if
think I think it helps the troops. I think that's fantastic. But think about that membership thing, and try to get
absolutely.
members on board, because that'll just exponentially grow your organization, and it'll give you
Mhm.
clout, right? I think it's
Yep.
fantastic. And maybe 10 years from now, people are going to be talking about it, that, hey, this organization is powerful. They can compete with Lockheed Martin. But thanks
Ah.
again. I really appreciate it.